Hello, Steve from Unexplored Films here, and today we're going to be having lots of fun filming some Star Wars miniatures. The original Star Wars films are an amazing feat of special effects, and it's interesting that Disney's series The Mandalorian seems to be revisiting the practical models because they really do look good. Now, if like me, you grew up in the 80s or 90s and have some Star Wars toys lying around, this can be a really fun experiment to try. Although these are very small and they're not nearly as big as the models that were used for making the original films, it made me want to try an experiment to see if we could get some shots of them looking good. And these days it has never been easier to combine shots of miniature models with other digital effects and really bring a scene to life. And if you're interested in filmmaking and practical and visual effects, then please subscribe and you'll get to see lots more. So in 1977, when Industrial Light and Magic were filming the original Star Wars film, they mostly did these by moving the camera instead of the model. This was because the models were pretty fragile and they were easier to light if they stood in one place. So the camera would do the moving instead, and they would use a motion control system so that they would get some nice steady slow camera movements, and they would film them at a low frame rate so that when they played the film back, the move would look a lot quicker. We started by setting up our blue screen and our lighting to make it evenly lit. We chose blue instead of green to match the original films, and also because it produces less color spill and it usually gives you darker edges, which is good if we're putting our subject against a dark background like space. Now, we don't have a motion control system, we just have a regular slider, but this can still allow you to get quite creative with some camera moves. So the first challenge for us was the size of the models that we already had. These are a lot smaller than the models they would have originally used. The Star Destroyer is in fact a playset which opened up and revealed some other things inside, but we kept it closed. So we set up the Star Destroyer as a first test. It was just sitting at the end of the slider and it was supported by a light stand which was hidden by some blue paper. Next, for lighting, a single light source is usually good because it'll look like a sun or a bright star throwing some light. So there were a couple of basic things to do to make this model look not so tiny. If you use a nice wide lens, this is going to be a big help, and it means you can get closer to the model. We used a 16-35 lens on the wide 16 end. Next, you really need to reduce your depth of field as much as possible, otherwise the model is really going to look tiny and you're going to be changing focus between different parts of it. We need to close our iris right down to try and get as much of the model in focus as possible, so you want the highest f number you can see displayed. This reduces the depth of field and helps make models look larger. This will make the whole scene darker, but hopefully you can boost your lighting to compensate for this. It will, however, also reveal any dust or dirt on your lens, so make sure you clean it. Next, we just tried some very slow camera moves along the slider heading for the model, and just tried to set the focus somewhere between the start and the end point. Now, the camera had to get really close to the model in order to try and get any kind of interesting move out of this shot. And as I say, the main problem is that the Star Destroyer model is just so small that this was quite a difficult shot to try and make look good. In the end though, there were a couple of fairly decent passes that looked like the Star Destroyer was approaching the camera. We had a bit more luck with the TIE Fighter because this was meant to be a smaller craft than the Star Destroyer anyway, and again I mounted this on a light stand. This left the TIE Fighter sitting at a bit of an angle, but I didn't actually mind that because as it's meant to look like it's flying anyway, a slight angle made it look slightly more dramatic. This time we mounted the TIE Fighter just off to one side of the camera slider, and this allowed just enough room for the camera and the wide angle lens to move past it. Now, because this was an action shot, it seemed like a good idea to try and test the low frame rate concept that they had used in the original films. We were filming with a Sony FS7, and this is a camera that allows you to get a nice low frame rate. But when we play this shot back, we need to get the motion blur looking correct. You can make sure your shutter is set on angle instead of speed. By keeping our shutter angle at 180, we can still retain natural looking motion blur, which was the key to those original shots looking not like stop motion, but properly moving fast. These settings also let a lot more light into the camera, and this somewhat compensates for us having to keep that really deep focus. Now, we make films for a living, hence we had a nice camera to use for this, but if you're using a smaller DSLR or something more basic, I found that dropping the shutter speed as much as you can gets you a fairly similar effect if you speed up your clip later. We actually found that by mounting the slider on a very slight incline, we could just use gravity to get a really slow camera move down the rail, and it would move right past the TIE Fighter model with only about a centimetre gap. This was important because the closer that wide-angle lens can get to the model, the bigger the model will look. So when filming with the low frame rate, the footage looks kind of juddery as it is being recorded, but when you play it back, it looks nice and smooth, and that motion blur looks really natural, and this is exactly how they used to do it in the old films. Finally, that just leaves the background. Now, of course, these days you can add any image you want, but if you really want to make this part a practical effect as well, you can always punch some holes in some black card and film it against a bright light. This can be a really nice method of getting some twinkling, organic looking stars, and you get extra points if you're going for more practical effects. Now, you might well be saying, I don't have a blue screen or green screen or anything like what you have. Well, we did a test with the TIE Fighter model in front of just a black backdrop, and I think if you blacked out whatever was supporting the model, and if you weren't bothered about there being no stars in the background, you could also have a go doing it this way. Now, we created these shots in Adobe After Effects, and the great thing is with this effect, we've done the hard part already by getting that nice camera movement on the day. There isn't that much post-production we need to do to make this look like it's flying through space. First, you can add the Keylight effect, and if you set this to screen matte, you can then play around with the clip black and the clip white settings, and this really helps you to see which areas are going to be kept. The white is what's going to stay, and the black is what is going to get removed. Now, back in the day, this was a lot more difficult because they were doing this optically onto film, but these days it is much easier to remove a well-lit blue or green screen and composite in other elements. Next, you can change back to final result, and you can also use the key cleaner and the advanced spill suppressor effects as well. Next, it's really just a simple matter of using the pen tool to draw a mask around your object and then keyframe it to match the movement. The mask will then change over time and then move with your object. This then just leaves a blank background, and you can drop in anything you like on top of this. We dropped in this star field element, which is just a high quality photo, but of course you could do this using your practical footage of your own stars as well. You can add the Lumetri color effect and change the values on there to make it match the background and the lighting a little bit more. Finally, by just keyframing the position of the stars a little bit to match the movement of the TIE Fighter, this made the whole thing come to life and look like the camera was doing a slight pan as the ship flew past it. And then if you want to, you can also keyframe things like the scale and the rotation to make the move a little bit more interesting. Now, we couldn't do this too much because of our light source coming from one direction, but we could just do it a little bit, and that made the shot more dynamic. So we tried this process with both the TIE Fighter and the Star Destroyer, and although the TIE Fighter shot was much shorter, it was more successful than the Star Destroyer because the model was at a better scale. But we then created a shot where both ships were in the same frame, and somehow the Star Destroyer looked better in that one. So these finished shots are obviously only a few seconds long, but they really demonstrated that you can do some amazing stuff with a wide lens and some tiny little miniature models. So if you have some similar things lying around at home, see what results you can get. And if you'd like to see more experiments combining miniatures with digital elements, let us know in the comments and subscribe. I have been Steve from Unexplored Films, and I'll see you next time.